Well, good morning. It's good to see all of you. It was a blessing to be in Cape Girardeau, Missouri last week watching our son Luke play golf, and so it's a blessing to be back here as well. I've never been to Cape Girardeau before, but I'm telling you what, in that part of Missouri, when it rains and rains and rains. I was just waiting for Noah to show up with an ark. So it's a blessing to be with you today. Well, last Sunday you heard from Abigail about the Kansas Leadership Center. The good news is we have all of the slots filled plus about 13 on the wait list. So that's a terrific thing as we seek to empower people to lead more effectively in the places where we find ourselves. And just to say it again, why are we doing this sermon series? Because every single one of us is a leader. Whether you believe it or not, you're a leader because everywhere you are influencing people. And leadership is influence. There's a book that we've been mentioning in this series called Canoeing the Mountains. I would encourage you, if you're interested in this topic of leadership, to get this book. It's written by a man named Todd Bolsinger. Pastor Jill quoted him last week. He's at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena. He's a Presbyterian pastor, and this is a phenomenal book about how to lead in uncharted territory. Now, he is quoting some people from Harvard, and those of you who go through the Kansas Leadership Center will be acquainted or reacquainted with these very important terms. And I want to give them to you because I want to get them deep into your minds and hearts as we think through what it means to be effective in our leadership. The first is technical problems. This is a term that I want to acquaint you with. What are technical problems? Technical problems are things like, my tooth hurts. So you go to Dr. Lukens over here and you get your tooth fixed. He knows how to do that. He does it very well. So a technical problem is, I've got a toothache. I'm going to go to somebody who knows how to fix that. So the solutions you see come from best practices. You go to somebody who knows what they're doing and they solve the problem. Tyson here is going to have surgery on his knee, right? I'm assuming that you did not choose me to do your surgery. That would be a very unwise thing, right? Because he needs somebody who is an expert in how to fix knees. And that expert's going to say, Tyson, the moral of this story is don't ever ski again the rest of your life. But there are technical problems and technical solutions. We get that. But here's the harder part. The adaptive challenges. There are challenges we face that are not easily solved. There are challenges we face that going to the expert might be helpful. It might not be. It might solve it. It may not. It cannot be solved by one's existing knowledge and skills. Therefore, you have to make a shift. A shift in what? Values, expectations, attitudes, or behaviors. So, let me give you an example. Yesterday I had a wedding at Fulton Family Farms. Have any of you been there? I've never been there before in my life until yesterday. It's south of Towanda. So I did what most people do today. I got out a paper map. Wrong. I got out my smartphone and I plugged in Fulton Family Farms. We live in Bel Air. It said go to 254. I go to Towanda. I go south, and it takes me to a road that is closed. So I look at my GPS on the phone and I think, okay, this is not going to work. So I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I figure, well, okay, there's got to be a solution here. So I start backtracking, and the GPS says there's a road about a half a mile, take it. So I take it. And it starts out okay, but I soon discover that it's a road that I've seen before in Montana that is not designed for cars. And then all of a sudden I get into this deep ravine, and there's no turning back. And so I did what you would do. I drove about 80 miles an hour through this deep water. And I come to the end of this road, and there's a gate. And I get out of my car, and I'm just praying, Lord, may this gate not be locked. Well, by the grace of God, it was not locked. So I opened the gate, and I walked back to my car. And by the time I got back to my car, the gate had closed. So I go and open it again, and it closes again. Now, all of what I'm describing is an adaptive challenge or a technical problem. A little of both, right? It is so true. A couple of weeks ago, I'm with one of my colleagues for a mentoring session. The clerk says to me, I gave you the senior discount and charged your lunch partner regular price. To which I said, my lunch partner is 67 years of age. The clerk said, you look older, it's your gray hair. Now, is that a technical problem or an adaptive challenge? Are you with me? You're not helping me solve this. Why are you so silent all of a sudden? So the technical problem can be solved with a technical solution, which is called hair dye, right? But there's an adaptive challenge here in that I have to deal with the reality of aging. Are you all with me? So I was standing in line at a grocery store the other day, and this man and I struck up a conversation because he's standing there impatiently, as am I, and he says, I am 57 years of age, and I still do not know what on earth I am here for. What do I do about that? This came after he found out that I'm a pastor. Now, is that a technical problem or an adaptive challenge? It's an adaptive challenge. How do you deal with the fact that you're alive and you find that your life isn't as meaningful as you would like? In the book of Genesis, chapter 5, there's a list of all the patriarchs and the matriarchs of faith, and it gives a description of their life and how they impacted people and how long they lived. But when it comes to Methuselah, it says, thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Now, did Methuselah have a technical problem or an adaptive challenge? This is a time for interaction. Just to make sure we're all on the same page with why we need this sermon series, I don't know if you've seen this book, iGen, by a professor, Dr. Twenge is how it's pronounced. She's written this book called iGen. Have you heard of it? iGen, it's a very scary book. And I'm not one given to fear, but it's scary because the research is so incredibly alarming. The iGen are those people that are born basically mid-90s to 2012. Her research shows that these are our kids who have never not known anything but a cell phone, an iPhone. That's why she calls them the iGen. And there's a lot of research that I'm not going to get into, but the thing I want to share with you is that she says that the iGen has one thing in common that is very different from their brothers and sisters, a part of the millennial generation. The millennial generation is interested in spirituality, but not religion. The iGen is not interested in either. And her comment in the book is that it is possible, given this trend, that there could be a day when Christianity as we know it is completely extinct in North America. Now, is that a technical problem or an adaptive challenge? We have to learn to adapt to a changing world. Maybe you saw the newspaper this week. We've had it in our own midst that there is what has been identified as an epidemic among us in terms of the suicide rate in Sedgwick County. And that's not even including Butler County and other counties around us. Is that a technical problem or an adaptive challenge? So that's why we're looking at Moses. And we're looking at Zipporah. And we're looking at Aaron. And these three leaders are going to help us lead. The technical problems have technical solutions. We can do that. The adaptive challenges that we face in our culture and in our lives and in our homes is a totally different ballgame. So we're going to look first at Exodus, and I'm just going to start, and when my time's up, I'm going to stop. There's going to be 2 more sermons, and we'll get as far as we can get with this. I've been sharing with you that I keep hearing the voice of my Jewish rabbi professor in my mind that I can't paraphrase. And the other thing I didn't tell you that I should have is that he said, and don't ever put this stuff on screens. This is sacred. My Jewish neighbor, by the way, who's a part of the conservative Jewish movement, went to one of our neighbors' baptisms recently. And he went because we have a strong cul-de-sac where we have Greeks and we've got Jews and we've got Muslims and you name it, we've got it. And it's beautiful and it's wonderful and it's challenging all at the same time. And so my Jewish neighbor, who's very committed to the Jewish tradition, is married to a Christian. And she's a Baptist. And every once in a while she likes to do her Baptist thing with him. And he likes to do her Jewish thing, his Jewish thing with her, and it's just fun. I mean, let's just call it fun. But it's entertainment to watch. But he went to a baptism of one of our neighbors recently, and somebody had a Bible on the floor, and he had to leave. And he texted me and said, Jeff, I was at this Protestant church, and there was a Bible on the floor. I couldn't handle it. I had to get out of there. See, for the Jews, this is sacred. So whenever we try to do anything to make it a little more accessible, they say, bring the people to the Word. Don't take the Word to the people in the sense of dumbing it down or trying to make it so that it's not sacred. So that's why, out of respect for my Jewish brothers and sisters, I'm going to read here rather than project it. So we're going to start at chapter 4, verse 31. And you've already heard in this story that Moses has been called, the Israelites are enslaved, and it picks up verse 31. When they heard that the Lord had taken note of the Israelites, and that he had seen their plight, they bowed low in homage. Now, I'm going to give you and this is more of a teaching sermon because I know there are those among us who need that every once in a while, but there's some leadership principles that are universally true no matter where you are in life and no matter the place where you find yourself. And here's the first thing I want to say, is that if you're a leader, you will find yourself overwhelmed. Is that true? If you are a parent, you will find yourself overwhelmed. If you're a business owner, you will find yourself overwhelmed. If you're a professional person practicing dentistry, there will be days when you find yourself overwhelmed. If you're a person in retirement and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with your life, you will find yourself overwhelmed. If you spend any time reading the news, you will find yourself overwhelmed. Now, am I only preaching to myself? We're living in overwhelming times, and one of the things that we first have to realize from Moses is that he kept reminding the people, God sees your suffering. And you've heard me say it before. You heard Pastor Jill say it last week. I'm going to keep saying it every time, because when you look at what the Israelites went through, it is unbelievable. Now, if you take a pyramid, I probably should have given a picture of this, a pyramid in Egypt, just one pyramid, how many bricks would that take? Guesses? 25 million for one pyramid. The Israelites were making bricks that look like that. They are made out of straw with mortar, and it was an incredibly challenging task, and they would work from sunup to sundown and even beyond. Moses is trying to remind the people, God sees your suffering. And if you're a person who feels overwhelmed, God knows it. God sees it. God is with you in it. And here's one of the things that is so important to say, that is so respectful of our Jewish heritage, is this notion that apart from God, we can't do anything significant. But apart from humanity, God will not do anything significant. So God sees the need, and who does God call? Moses. God uses people. Somebody once asked, is there a plan B? There's no plan B. God uses people. God uses you. God uses me. You've heard the story perhaps of the man who found himself overwhelmed with all the tragedies and the suffering of life, and he goes to Africa and he's just immersed in hunger with babies with protruding tummies, and he's overwhelmed, and he goes to God in prayer and he says, God, I do not understand why you don't do something about this. And the voice of God speaks, I have. Well, it sure doesn't look like it to me. Oh, yes, I have done something about it. Well, what is it? I pointed it out to you. Leadership is overwhelming. But God uses people. Now, we're going to keep on here. Chapter 5. You're welcome to follow along, but the Hebrew to English translation, as done so by the Jewish rabbis, is a little different. So the Christian Bible oftentimes will nuance places where they just keep it very direct. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Let my people go, that they may celebrate a festival for me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord that I should heed him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go. They answered, The God of the Hebrews has manifested himself to us. Let us go, we pray, a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he strike us with pestilence or sword. But the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you distract the people from their tasks? Get back to work. And Pharaoh continued, The people of this land are already so numerous, and you would have them cease from their labors. So what did Pharaoh do? That same day he charged the taskmasters and foremen of the people, saying, You shall no longer provide the people with straw for making bricks. Therefore, make them go find the straw. He punished them. So they go to Pharaoh. Let me just make this plain. They go to Pharaoh and say, "You have got to let the people go." And he says, "I'll show you who's in charge," and he makes life worse for the Israelites. So the taskmasters and foremen of the people went out and said to the people, Pharaoh says, "I will not give you any straw. You must go and get the straw yourselves wherever you can find it, but there can be no decrease whatever in your work." See, they had quotas. They were not used to having to get straw. It was provided for them. What's happening here is that they're now having to go get the straw and yet meet the quota. And guess what? They can't do it. And therefore, they're punished. And here's another principle of leadership. Things will often get worse before they get better. And they did here. And if you read this story, it's rather amazing because they get punished. And you know what happened to they call them here in the Hebrew Bible, the taskmasters. Who were the taskmasters? They were Hebrews. They were Jews. And what did they do? They had a group of people that they were responsible for. And when the group didn't meet the quota, guess what they did to the taskmaster? They would bind them and whip them, and then they would put them in water. This whole thing with waterboarding, it started then. And that's why in verse 21, they said to Moses and Aaron, "May the Lord look upon you and damn you." You know that phrase, God blank you? It's right here in Scripture. May God damn you. Is it any wonder that in verse 22, Moses returns to the Lord and says, "Oh Lord, why in the world did you call me to do this?" As a leader, have you ever been damned? As a parent, have you ever been cussed out? Moses returned to the Lord and said, "O Lord, why did you bring harm upon your people? Why? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, you have dealt worse with this people, and you still have not delivered them." Now, there are people who, when they read the Hebrew Scriptures, see, they say, "Oh, it's just too real. I don't like it." This is real. And that's why it's helpful. And that's why it has God's inspiration to speak into our lives. And here's the thing that I want to say to you about Moses, is that he comes to realize that things will get worse before they get better. And too often, this is the point when leaders and followers want to give up. This is when people start peeling away. The Israelites were peeling away from Moses. They were peeling away from God. They were peeling away because Moses made things worse. If you're a leader, there will be times when you want to give up. And here's the interesting thing that is so countercultural. And I'm just touching the tip of this, but there's something here. Moses has strong passion. We've been illustrating that in this series. He's aware of his weakness. He's aware that he's a coward. He's aware that he has a speech impediment. He's aware that he's not the strongest leader. But why is it that God is calling somebody like Moses, who has strong passion but deep awareness of his weakness? Where does that lead? It leads to high dependence upon God. If you have a leader who has strong passion and focuses on their strengths, the dependence factor upon God is lower. Now, I've read the book Strengths Finder. I find it rather helpful. But if Moses were standing here, he'd say, there's no place for that. Why was Moses called the most humble of all people? Because of his strong passion and his awareness of his weaknesses, which led him to a deep dependence upon God. Now, what kind of leader would you rather have? This one or this one? I'm going to close this section with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A few years back, our daughter Grace and I went to see our son Drew. Meredith wasn't able to go with us to Washington, D.C., the Baltimore area, because he was doing an internship at Under Armour. That's an interesting place, but that's not the point of this story. So I wanted her to see the monument of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And one of the things that you will see if you go to that exhibit, if you can call it that, memorial, is what happened in January of 1957, where he reached a point where, sitting at his kitchen table at midnight, he wanted to give up because the people were damning him. Not just the people that he expected to be against him, but his own people were saying, "You're a terrible leader." He says, and I quote, "I realized that the only place I could turn was God. I was afraid. The people were looking to me for leadership, and they wanted strength and courage, and I had none. I was at the end of my powers. I had nothing left. I'd come to the point where I couldn't face it alone." And then he says, and I quote, "The next thing that happened is that I experienced the presence of the divine as I had never experienced God before. It seemed as though I could hear the quiet assurance of an inner voice saying, 'Stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth, and God will be with you forever.'" And that's exactly what gave him the confidence and the courage to move forward, and the same is true for Moses. Because we see in this story of Moses that after he complained to God, "Why in the world did you call me?" God said to Moses, "You are the one. You are the one to go, and I will be with you." Well, next week we'll get into Exodus chapter 6. But here's what I want you to think about in just a quick moment of silent prayer and reflection, if you would please. God called Moses on the basis of his passion and his weakness. What is your passion? Where is your area of passion? Where is your weakness? What is your weakness? Can you name that? And always remember, God calls each of us and will always be with us. Let's have a moment of silent prayer.